Hey. Can't do it. Okay. I'll leave that in because that's what the people expect. It's Rob. This week we're checking back in with Portugal because they just had elections last Sunday, January 30th, with subtly significant results, I guess you can say. I mean, I like Portugal. I know you like Portugal, so we'll take any excuse to check back in with Portugal. But there is a reason this week, and it might not be a good reason. It's kind of, by subtly significant, I mean like the rest of Europe can't go around making comments like, Portugal, they actually have a pretty left-wing government down there. It's over. We can't say that anymore.
That was it. Even though all the reports were like, oh, it's just the same again. Like, I don't know, the media reports were just like, oh, look.
Yeah, because the Socialist Party, which has been the government, despite needing support from the left-wing governments, achieved an outright majority in the recent elections, which perhaps changes some of the dynamics there, and including the electoral influence, at least, that the left-wing parties had. So we'll go through all those results, talk about the far-right party Chega, which we've talked about before on the program, and a new party, which Kieran and I just talked about for the first time in our last bonus, which is a new ultraliberal party.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Finally got one.
Yeah, you finally got your FDP.
Congratulations on your own FDP.
Yeah, and to talk about all that, we have my friend Manuel, Lisbon native, committed communist, does a lot of climate activism, and I'm sure he has a lot to say and will enlighten us about what's going on there. So, Manuel, thank you for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Yeah. And thanks for this very exciting introduction.
You deserve it, I promise.
You are great.
All right, I should start with, I think we should dive right into the Socialist Party versus the two left-wing parties and that dynamic, because it really is the crux of the issue. So last November is when I guess we need to start, because these weren't regularly scheduled elections. These were a snap elections triggered by the president with the support of the Socialist Party. And the reason is basically because the Socialist Party wanted to kick out the left, or not have to rely on the left-wing parties to govern anymore. And that is a long time coming, because from 2011 to 2015, a right-wing government in Portugal implemented troika policies and austerity. And the 2015 elections was a backlash to that. The center-right did not have a majority, and the Socialist Party didn't either. But with the help of the two left-wing parties, the Left Bloc and the Communist Party, or the Communist Union, they were able to have a government. It was something like a confidence and supply government. The left-wing parties did not take any executive or cabinet positions, but thanks to an agreement with the Socialist Party, they got a slate of left-wing policies, things like a freeze on further privatizations, some limit to austerity, I guess you can say.
Which made sense, because the whole austerity policies after the financial crisis were not too well received.
But it's even that is not. It was never a stable agreement. And even leading up to the 2019 elections, the socialists were advocating for basically the chance to run their own government without the baggage of the left. And the socialists did gain seats in the 2019 elections, but not enough for an absolute majority. But they also didn't return to that kind of more formal agreement from 2015 to 2016 that they had with the left-wing parties. And that's why since 2019, it was, it was on a case-by-case basis that I think individual budget votes it was unclear if they were going to be approved. And it was the last one in late 2021 that triggered the dissolution of the government. So there's a lot to unpack there, including why, in what ways the socialists resisted more left-wing policies. It's often said that they're more, they'll take directives from Brussels in a way, and the left-wing parties want to do something more radical. I think the best way to start that I found framing the question for me is that I've heard multiple times that the socialist decision to call elections in November was a win-win for them and a lose-lose for the left-wing parties, because it's a win in the sense that if it started with a budget vote, that was a pretty that didn't not a very with a lot of that was unpalatable, let's say, to the left wing parties. You know, it was the socialists' idea of a budget, not the left wing parties. And so it's a win in the sense that if the left wing parties, you know, betray their principles and vote for it, then the socialists get what they want. Yeah. But it's also a win in the sense that if the socialists call for elections, then the left will be punished. And that's the sticking point. Like, why? I understand the first part, why that's a win for the socialists, but why is it a loss for the left-wing parties? Why are they going to get blamed? Or why do the socialists get the credit for reversing the Troika era austerity policies, when they kind of had to be dragged along a little bit, it seems like, by popular pressure?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is, like, if you just start at the time when the budget was proposed, I really don't think the left could have done something else. I mean, the Communist Party and the Left Bloc, they proposed a bunch of a few different points for negotiation, and the Socialist Party basically didn't give them any of them. And they were
none. Like,
none. Like, they made some gestures and they made some like symbolic things which kind of sounded similar, but I mean, really, like, substantially.
Come back to that at some point.
Yeah, but substantially, I mean, not a single one of them. And so, and they weren't even. So, I mean, for example, I mean, the Communist Party and the Left Bloc, they would have on their own programs things like nationalizing natural monopolies like energy and stuff, but they didn't propose any of that for the negotiation. I mean, they proposed things which were like reversing austerity measures, things that the Socialist Party had supported itself before, and the Socialist Party was
on the same platform basically.
Yeah,
so they didn't introduce anything more radical.
Yeah, they didn't exactly. They proposed only things which were kind of plausible and not things which were just their own platform and that the Socialist Party could never accept. And in the Socialist Party, it was completely intransigent. They didn't give them any of the things that they wanted. So basically, they had no choice but to reject the budget. I mean, if they didn't, they would just become some kind of, you know, just a irrelevant parties supporting the majority of the Socialist Party.
Like the Green Party and the ÖVP in Austria.
Yeah,
even though like that is a more extreme, situation.
Yeah. But I think it's even, I hope this isn't going too far back, but I understand that even the decision in 2015, before the election results, there was a lot of talk in, I know, like the Left Bloc, for example, like not to accept a minority government with the socialists no matter what. So it wasn't, you have two left-wing parties that aren't different just because they're further left on an electoral spectrum, but have a different approach to the general electoral politics that perhaps the Greens are so in it. And so how did that unfold then? Like from that point to where we are now, where they, it seems like relied on the electoral path and then basically had their energy drained away. Was there another path? Like how exactly did that happen?
I mean, in 2015, the election in 2015 was the end of the austerity government. There had been like huge mass demonstrations against austerity in Portugal. I mean, there was a demonstration with 1 million people in Lisbon, which is 10% of the population. Yeah. And the Left Bloc and the Communist Party were very involved in these mobilizations. And so this is why they got such a good vote in the 2015 elections. And so, then they were in this situation where either they support the Socialist Party in a left-wing government, or they would allow the same prime minister who was doing the austerity policies to remain in power. So this is, it was kind of political suicide.
Right. Because it would have been the reason it would have been the same prime minister is because the center-right party got more votes. Yeah. And so the alternative would be a grand coalition, which I think hasn't happened in Portuguese history because the socialists.
No grand coalitions, but you've had minority governments of one of the center parties, and then they would just go case by case, and the other party would sometimes approve. So. But there was another. Sorry.
Nothing.
But there was another thing in 2015, which was that there was actually something that the Socialist Party and the left could agree on, which was reversing some of the austerity measures. So things have gotten so bad that we've got to a point that then the left and the Socialist Party actually have something in common.
Yeah.
So this was the basis of their understanding and of the document that they signed. That was then the basis for these first 4 years of the left coalition, is that they agreed on some basic things that they needed to reverse from the austerity government. So this is what it made it possible in the first 4 years. This is what made it work, is that even people who voted for the left bloc and the Communist Party, they could agree that they were not getting the government they wanted, but they were getting something,
Mm-hmm.
And so this kept somehow the stability of these first 4 years. Right? And then it's changed completely in 2019.
Well, why is that? Because the 2019 results, the socialists got more seats, but not enough, not the result they were hoping for, which they got this time around. The left bloc had about 9 to 10% of the vote, and the communists about 5 or 6, which was, I think the communists lost seats.
Communists lost some seats, but the left bloc maintained. Yeah, the communists went down from, I think, 17 to 12 seats.
Okay. So not insignificant, but less of a drop than it was from 2019 to 2022. And so why did their position deteriorate so much more quickly post 2019? Is it just Corona? Is there something else?
Well, so I mean, I think what changed mostly was that the Socialist Party decided it's enough. They had done what they thought was, acceptable to them together with the left, and then from 2019 they had clearly a strategy of changing course, of going more towards the center. So, the Communist Party, after the 2019 elections, the Communist Party immediately said they don't want to sign another agreement. Okay. This is probably reflecting the fact that they lost 5 seats in parliament because of the agreement, whereas the left bloc kept their seats. And the left bloc proposed to the Socialist Party to sign another agreement, and the Socialist Party rejected it. Oh. So the Socialist Party decided that from then on they want to govern by themselves, and so they did. Because they don't want to be, they called it, they don't want to be hostages of the left. So that's what they said. So from then on their strategy changed, right? And this is the moment when the left also needed to change their strategy and start speaking more strongly about their divergences with the Socialist Party. So trying to prepare basically for this break that happened now. And the question is, why didn't they? Right? Because the problem of the way the break happened now was kind of sudden. There was not enough. I don't think there was enough work of trying to convince people that there is a need to break with the Socialist Party and govern on the left. And I don't know. I think in 2019 so there was the election and they voted for the 2020 budget, and this one they approved or they abstained and let it pass. So both the left bloc and the Communist Party. And so there, I guess you could say, it was the first budget, so you have to give the benefit of the doubt. So they decided to let that one pass. And then there was a budget for 2021, and there the left bloc voted against, and the Communist Party voted for it. So the Communist Party abstained. So I think they were already getting ready to start. They probably had a strategy. I assume that they had a strategy to start breaking with the Socialist Party, but then COVID came.
Yeah,
so,
something unexpected.
Yeah, and so then they couldn't reject the budget. So there was the budget for 2020, and then a supplementary budget for 2020 because of COVID, and they had to approve because they really had no. And I think this was the problem, is that they were stuck. Right? If they had a strategy of starting to do a more hard opposition and to break from the Socialist Party, I think it got kind of destroyed by COVID, because then everyone had to be very responsible and support the government.
I want to come back to that, but the other narrative that I heard a lot is this strategic voting. I keep saying it's like voto útil or something in Portuguese. I see it all the time.
Voting,
which is basically that so after these snap elections were called, which I think, as Manuel has laid out, it was it was a very long simmering dynamic. but the Socialist Party was maybe not that far away from the Social Democratic, the center-right party in the polls. It didn't seem like they were going to get the absolute majority that they wanted, and I'm not sure exactly how the narrative begun, but there was, after the results came in and the Socialists had a better than expected result and actually got enough seats to clear the absolute majority, which, by the way, they only have by about one seat, I think one seat. The narrative that I heard was something like the two left-wing parties lost 350,000 votes, and the Socialist Party picked up about that same number of votes. And there was this idea that the strategic voting was necessary to prevent a right-wing coalition because Chega and this new ultra-liberal party were on the rise.
I mean, it's a common strategy, right? Like you see that in Turkey, you see that here as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was effective, you'd say? Like, do you know anyone who voted tactically, maybe?
Yeah, lots of people. I mean, this was definitely a big factor, and it's that the polls were just the polls showed that the Socialist Party and the center right were very, very close. So this was in this. You even noticed this in the Socialist Party campaign. In the beginning of their campaign, they were calling for an outright majority, and they were just dunking on the left. I mean, their whole strategy from the beginning was, the left have been irresponsible. We should give us a majority so we can govern by ourselves. I mean, it wasn't even considered a possibility that the right could win the elections. And then as the campaign progressed, the polls showed the right getting very close to the Socialist Party. They in some of these tracking polls, the Social Democrat Party was even ahead for like one poll or something. And so then this changed everything. I mean, the Socialist Party stopped talking about outright majority and started attacking the right much more and talking about how if the right won, then the only way for them to have a majority in parliament was to include the ultra-liberals and the far right. And so this became now after a while, the campaign just became this. It's just the Socialist Party attacking the center-right by saying that if they go to govern, they need to rely on the far right. And I think this caused really a lot of people to switch from the left to the Socialist Party because they were afraid of this.
Why do you think that was effective? I mean, to me, it seems like a certain kind of political discourse or a certain kind of political culture that I feel like as an American I'm well acquainted with, but that it's like a losing battle for a lot of leftist principles or ideas because you're not debating policies, or you're not even debating the idea of a social system under which to live, but you're debating very like strategic and specifically against this kind of right-wing populism. And I feel like that redounds to the right-wing populists themselves, which a lot of people have said, all the media attention that Chega and Ventura got, but redounds also to a certain technocratic, centrist management politics.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't even, especially after the fact that we know that we now know it's possible for the Socialist Party to go into a coalition with the left, right? So for me, that kind of removes the necessity of this tactical vote, because the right is only going to win if people vote for the right. I don't know how voting for the left can make the right win. But I think a lot of people believe this, and I think also the one thing we have to see is that not everyone who is voting for the Communist Party or the left bloc are what you would call like leftists. I mean, there are people who want the Socialist Party to be in government, but who think the Socialist Party has drifted too much to the right, and so they want the left bloc and the Communist Party to force them to govern a bit more to the left, right? And those people are a part of the left bloc and the Communist Party, more of the left bloc. The Communist Party has their own traditional base, and doesn't vary that much. But the left bloc has a lot of people who vote for the left bloc who actually want a Socialist Party government, a bit skewed to the left. And those people, as soon as they saw that there was a possibility that the Socialist Party would lose, they ran. They just voted for the Socialist Party.
Interesting.
I mean, it is a typical dilemma, no? Like that the left has, the more like far left in comparison to the Socialist Party. I mean, you said that you in the US, like as an American, wouldn't understand because of the coalition thing that are going on. But in the same way, if you have something like the Green Party or something like that in the US and nobody votes for them because they say in the end, like it's like you waste your vote or something like that. You know, in Portugal, you have, of course, more chances to actually have these parties in the parliament, unlike the Green Party in the US. But of course, it's a dilemma, and you want to be, you know, if you have pressure from the right. But as you said, it's as soon as you know, okay, there is a possibility of a coalition where you don't have to actually, you know, sell out your ideals completely. Unfortunately, it was the situation now that you could not, that the left could not really push through their agenda in this coalition. But yeah, there is a possibility of a coalition.
And I think it's also it's a really old phenomenon, right? I mean, and the weird thing now is it's not. I mean, the same thing happened with fascism before, right? That it serves as a way to legitimize the center and the status quo politics, right? It's that as soon as there's some kind of monster out there, suddenly the shit that we've had for we've been living in shit for all this time, right? But suddenly if there's this far right monster over there, then the shit is a bit better. So you vote for the shit to keep out the. And this is, but the weird thing now is that it's not. I mean, I could understand people wanting to do this in when there was an actual threat of fascists in power, right? Which is really not the case in Portugal, at least now, right? Chega doesn't have enough to be in power. I mean, they have enough MPs to now make some fuss in parliament. And they would, there was a possibility that the center-right government would have to be supported by them, but it's not like we're on the verge of having fascists taking power and brown shirts going on the streets. But this image is very useful for but stirring up the fear of this is very useful for the Socialist Party.
Yeah,
of course.
Yeah. It's. Well, as you said, I think you're really right when you say it's very comes in handy for any kind of centrist policies and any kind of image of stability or something like that, you know, and even being able to fish on the right, you know, saying oh shit, we can't lose voters to these parties, so we have to kind of bring them in, and by that we have to maybe move a bit, scooch a bit over to the right or something like that, or at least abandon our coalition partners. In that sense, you know.
Yeah, it was interesting because the center right for this election. So before the election, the center right had their own internal election, and the guy that won, Rui Rio, his whole thing was to do a campaign from the center, and there was a lot of debate in the right because of this, that people thought he was wrong, and I think this also is part of the explanation why the ultraliberals and the far right had so many votes, that the center right said explicitly that they were going to be moderate, and so the people who didn't like this, they voted for the ultra right.
Yeah. Wait, is that the guy?
Yeah. He's a bit of a character, and I want to return to him. Yeah. But I want to ask you something actually about what you said about some maybe soft left bloc voters, if that makes sense, that were switched back to the Socialist Party, because I think this is a dynamic that exists in a lot of countries, and it really makes you wonder what the basis for left-wing politics is, because on the one hand you can say it was a shout. So on the one hand you can say that it was good for the left to attract these kinds of voters because they have a larger base. But on the other hand, you can say when push came to shove, or when it actually came, it was important to fight for a left-wing a slate of left-wing policies. These are exactly the people. There's a very shallow attachment, and they'll turn around exactly. Is this? How do you avoid that? I guess is my question. Is it? I'm inclined to say something like it's an electoral thing, because when you're have the option to vote for maybe something a little better, and it's not going to empower the right wing in any way, then okay, you choose the slightly better option. But then that doesn't actually maybe create an organic base of new left-wing voters. I guess what I'm asking is, if even these people, the soft left, will switch back to the socialists, how do you attract more people to the left?
Yeah,
Is it outside voting? I don't know. I don't know if you have any. I know you're not going to solve the problem, but maybe you have some stories from Portugal for our listeners across Europe.
I mean, this is an old question, right? I mean, and the question is also why are the left parties in elections, right? Are they trying to build a base for a revolution, or are they just
reformist revolution?
Or are they just and this is the thing, right? When it's always this. I mean, when you are in order to be successful, to draw in more people, at least in electoral politics, and at least now in current conditions, you have to play the game of what is acceptable and what you can actually convince the Socialist Party to do. But then, of course, you have to sacrifice some things, and then eventually these people that you gain might be lost, right? So, and there was an interesting thing about the left bloc and the Communist Party in this election, exactly because of this, which was that they almost had two different political programs for this election. They had, if you actually read their program, they had their own program, meaning like what they would do if they were the most voted party, right? So they had nationalizing all of the natural monopolies, like energy and mail, many things like this. So their actual program, and then they had the things that they actually talked about during the campaign. So none of this. So the only time that they ever talk about nationalizations was when the Socialist Party attacked them in a debate by pulling it out of the program, right? Because they didn't want to talk about it, right? What they wanted to talk about was their, alternative program, which was the things that they actually think they can negotiate with the Socialist Party, right? Which was some changes to labor laws, some improvements to the national health system, some improvements to social security, minimum wage, So they were living this parallel life, this double life.
Yeah, it's funny, but it's also, I mean, at least in some sense, it's at least honest. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, but it was kind of weird that, during the whole campaign, they had just been talking about these things that they want to negotiate, and then they go into a debate with the Socialist Party, and the guy from the Socialist Party is like, oh, but you see here in your program, you want to nationalize energy and mail and all of this stuff. You know how much this is going to cost? Are you crazy? see. So, it's almost like, it's like red baiting, these people, they are pretending to be very moderate, but actually, if you read their program, they're communists.
They're actually cool.
You have to be very careful. Yeah.
You could vote for the cool guys.
Yeah, so this was weird, and I felt like, and I felt like, for example, when this happened with the left bloc, they weren't very. Their leader was a bit uncomfortable in the debate and wasn't very ready to defend. Like, she was there to talk about labor law and minimum wage. Yeah. She was not there to talk about nationalization. She was not ready. The Communist Party is a bit different because they have more.
They're always ready.
Yes. They did a bit better when they tried to accuse them of the nationalization, because they just said yes, of course.
Yeah.
This is good.
We got the Communist Party. What do you think?
Is there anything you want to share about because I want to ask, where do the parties go from here? Is it different for the left bloc and the communists? I know they're slightly different voter bases. Is there an opportunity in the, and I guess also personally, is it something that you and your milieu expected? Like, is it a surprise, or is it like, well, this was the going to happen eventually, and maybe it's out of the way or something, and now we can move forward?
I mean, it was kind of, as soon as the budget failed, it was pretty. I mean, what I thought when they called the elections was, it's the most likely thing is that the left is going to be destroyed. I mean, but I thought, maybe they can have really amazing campaign, and I don't know. And it's also, I feel like the left, like when they're fighting against, common sense and stability and whatever, you need some way to make, like, the only way that you're going to take a risk, if you're deciding if you want to vote for the Socialist Party or for the left bloc, is if you're really excited about something. Like, if there's something in their programs that are actually exciting people. And then for that, I think you need social movements, you need activity on streets, and this was very hard to do during during COVID.
During COVID, yeah.
But talking about the future, there was an interesting interview with someone in the left bloc just yesterday or something, where he was talking about that they're now planning to focus on social movements and trade unions, and that this is what they were doing before, right? And now they had this interlude of focusing on parliament, and now that they've become irrelevant in parliament again, I think they're going to go back into focusing on
more like
labor movement and social movement.
Back to the old me.
Yeah. I was about to ask that actually.
Yeah.
If there's anything else on the left on what to do, maybe lessons from Portugal, I'm all ears. But otherwise, there's a lot of funny stuff about the right, right.
Let me see if I had something here. There are some interesting details about for example, about the negotiations now for the budget. Mm-hmm. And there are certain things that just show how the Socialist Party was unwilling to negotiate. One of them is the minimum wage. So one of the Communist Party's demands for the negotiation of the budget was that the minimum wage should be raised to 800 euros in 2022.
Yeah.
And the Socialist Party wanted to raise it to 700 in 2022. Their response to the Communist Party's demand was just they didn't shift nothing. They had proposed 700 and they stayed at 700 and that was it. And then after the budget had failed and during the electoral campaign, the Socialist Party unveiled their big plan, where actually now they're going to raise the minimum wage to 900 euros until 2026.
Wow.
So they're like 1 year behind what the Communist Party wanted in terms of minimum. But they didn't propose this during the negotiations. So, it's really,
they didn't even want it to get passed. Basically,
yes.
They were like, look what we really wanted. But that's interesting. Yeah, that's very, very, very strategic.
There's I'm a little out of my element talking about this, but as I understand it, it's been argued that Portugal's recovery after the financial crisis, which has been buoyed by the fact that austerity measures were frozen and reversed in some ways, and for example, there was more social spending because people had a little bit more money to spend. But this, combined with tourism and other aspects that are boosting the Portuguese economy, means that it's not a full recovery, and that perhaps if people are voting for the socialists because they got Portugal out of the financial crisis, that maybe this won't last. Or who knows about the future of the world economy post COVID. But I guess there could be something in there where maybe it's a false victory or something for the socialists and their idea that, we've done enough to fix the Portuguese economy.
Well, yeah, I don't know. They've been, yeah, sure. They took credit for a lot of the measures that were proposed by the left bloc and the Communist Party, like the cheaper transportation passes in Lisbon and free school manuals and some in the minimum wage and some changes to labor laws, and of course they were also lucky that the actual world economy situation changed in their favor. And I guess what you're asking is whether they are going to now get screwed if the situation gets bad. But I'm not so sure, because now they have this money from the European Union to spend. This has been one of their big things also in the local elections, that they were going around telling everyone that now this money is coming. So they're very. This is also
money's coming. That's music to a lot of people's ears.
The EU check, the money's coming. So I think they at least are feeling positive that they can have some good 4 years, because they can use this EU money, and they've already started. During the whole campaign, the Socialist Party was one of their big selling points was that they already have the budget ready. So the one that was rejected. So if you we don't really, if you elect us and the next day we're going to propose again this budget and it's so good and
So
now already it seems like they're going to change some things from the budget, which had been put there by pressure from the left. So some things about taxing capital gains and things like this.
Oh,
So it's already starting. The right
Germany,
turn
that's
is already
something,
started.
damn. That's sad.
Well, I guess we should talk a bit about the right
Yeah.
on that,
Yes.
because
Let's
despite
turn
how
even further.
goofy and ridiculous they are, they appear to be exerting some kind of influence on Portuguese politics. Before we get to maybe the more high-profile, although quite small parties, I do want to talk about the center-right party because you mentioned him already. This
Oh, yeah.
Rui Vio is he's a bit of a character. You sent me a video
Yes.
that I think our listeners will appreciate, where it didn't like the video didn't quite have the context, but if I understand it correctly, it was election night and he was asked if he was going to step down,
Yes.
and to like avoid the question, he started speaking German.
He answered the question, but not very directly. And the journalist insisted, and then he said, this.
What did he say? Oh,
Do you want me to cut it in?
No,
or are you
yeah.
going to
Oh,
cut
I
it?
thought you were going to show it to us right now. No, well, then he said that, if I've already, then he said that to the journalist that, if I've already answered you in Portuguese, but if you want, I can answer you in German. So then he answered in German.
He did go to the German school in Lisbon.
Yeah, no, in Porto.
Okay. Oh, in Porto.
that
okay.
is the thing, huh? The German school thing.
We have another
Yeah.
German alum who we'll be talking about shortly. As I understand, it's not the first time he's done this. There was another news article of him.
So he likes to speak German.
Like a very similar situation,
That is
being asked and replying in German. I remember
always
a couple of years
sketchy
ago.
if someone starts speaking German at some point.
It's also it's very strange that he has this like populist kind of vibe, that's his thing, like using popular expressions, whatever.
Yeah.
So just speaking German in your election night speak is definitely not the populist. It's like
Yeah.
it's very anti-national.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's something
It's very
perhaps.
strange. I think it's because he had already lost and he was just like, fuck it, I can speak German if I want to.
But there's something just from the few clips I've seen of him, it is antagonistic, right? He's like kind of trolling the journalist by speaking German to him. And while on the one hand you could say that's not very populist, it reminds me a bit of Trump or someone who he's not at all. He has a golden toilet or whatever, but because he's being mean to people, even if it's completely alien to your experience, it works in some way.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
People are like,
I mean, he lost, so
see,
it didn't work out
showed
well.
that journalist by speaking German.
Yeah, exactly.
People are going to speak German here. It should be used to harass journalists.
Yeah.
Yes. No, I think it's, maybe that was his thought.
He also said he spoke out before about the influence of Freemasonry in the party. I don't know if you've heard about that.
This I didn't hear about. No.
I don't know. Is there anything else you want to
that's
share about the guy?
wild.
There just seem to be a lot of stories about him. He's a bit of a character.
I don't know. I mean, one thing that says a lot is that he was the mayor of Porto for a long time, and he's from there. And Porto was now he had one of his worst results was in Porto.
Oh,
So
shit.
the people that know him the best are
Good.
So it says, I don't know. A lot of people say he's very authoritarian. That doesn't,
Fine.
I see that.
I mean, he speaks German.
Yeah, it's already
I would never trust that.
comes with the territory.
Yeah.
Do you see like a more right wing turn in the party? I assume they're going to have like a leadership election, or I'm not sure of the exact dynamics. But like here in Germany, for example, our friend, I don't know if we've officially said it on the podcast, Friedrich Merz.
Friedrich Merz is the new leader of the CDU.
The
So,
right
like,
wing of the party is
when the CDU lost and now they're in the opposition, they're like basically the German equivalent of this. After 16 years in power, now they lost and they took the turn. Their conclusion was, "Damn, we're not right wing enough. Let's introduce someone that is like a strong right wing value, like." This dude did not get the nomination for like chancellery or like candidacy for
he
the
was the
chancellor
runner-up.
candidacy.
Yeah.
because they wanted to go with someone who's a bit more, you know, you nice little like uncle, like drunk uncle vibes. And
definitely the drunk uncle.
Yeah,
Friedrich Merz. Yeah, actually, maybe Hui Yu is a bit of a drunk uncle. I think. I think Merz is not. Right. He's a very dried out.
Friedrich Merz doesn't seem like he drinks. He stays sober to be more right wing.
In the final part of the campaign, when the polls showed the Socialist Party and the center right very close to each other, Rui Rio said that Costa should learn to lose with dignity. That didn't age very well.
No, it didn't.
No, but is there an idea of a right wing turn, or is it too early to tell?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's likely because already in the Congress before this election. So just before the election, the right managed to force an early Congress to try to the right in the Social Democratic Party managed to force an early Congress to try to get Rio out and the more right wing like liberal candidate in, and Rio won this internal election, and now that he had this terrible electoral result, it's quite likely that the right in the party is going to try to come back. Yeah.
Makes sense since the Socialist Party is now trying to occupy more space to the center. Yeah. You know, and then in the end there's no room in the center. So
exactly.
You know, like you can't run on the same platform or the same policies as they are doing, even though it's not the same, but like if there's too much overlapping, then you can say, oh, then we just keep the socialists in, because why not? They've brought us through the pandemic, or I don't know, you know, the stability kind of thing.
Yeah, and they lost a lot of votes to the far right. I mean, to the far right and to the ultra liberal right. So I think they want to get those back. So it's probably
that makes sense. Yeah.
I might as well bring them up because I think that is an interesting dynamic. We should start with Chega, which I think most people listening by now know. It's the Portuguese edition of your new far right populists. All the same. And it's a bit of a mixed bag, I think, in the election because, as Manuel alluded to, they have 12 seats now. That's 11 more than the last election. Technically, they're the third biggest party, although there's a huge gulf between the two major parties and the smaller parties, but still more than the two left-wing parties. But at the same time, they have fewer votes overall than they got in the presidential election, which Portugal is one of those countries where the president, it's not like France or something. It's
just representative.
But I mean, they have some power.
They can dissolve. Can they dissolve parliament?
Yeah, the president dissolved the parliament. These elections happen because the president dissolved the parliament.
So I don't know what's the status of Chega right now. Do you think it's almost like I get the impression a little bit that, especially there's a cycle of media hand wringing, but also real fear that comes with the rise of one of these parties. But that's almost been processed already because it happened in the presidential election, and then this is just a fait accompli. Like, okay, 12 seats, we'll learn to live with it.
Yeah, this was always going to. This was going to happen whenever the next parliamentary election happened. Right? I mean, it could be now or it could be 2 years from now. I find it very unlikely that in the 2 years between now and when the election normally would have happened, that they would somehow lose their support. And I don't know. I have no. One of the things that is that people are kind of waiting to find out is who are the other 11, right? Because Chega is like a one-man show.
Yeah, exactly. Right? It's just Ventura, basically.
It's this guy, and Ventura used to be. Sorry.
The big ass posters of Ventura everywhere in Lisbon, and it's just him basically.
Yeah, it's a personality cult.
Yes.
He has resigned multiple times in like very dramatic fashion, and then run again for the leadership in a new Congress, and then got 99% of the votes. Like multiple times, so
nobody else knows anyone from Chega.
He makes these outlandish. He sets this outlandish goal for himself for the elections, for example, and then he doesn't meet the goals, and then he resigns because he didn't meet the goal. Then there's a Congress, he runs again, he gets 99% of the votes, and he comes back. It's a really weird. So the other MPs that were elected, I only know one of them, and it's because one thing. So André Ventura used to be in the center right, in the Social Democratic Party, So he was there. So he got famous for two main reasons. One is he was a football commentator on TV.
Oh,
So
yeah.
these shows that are on like almost every day, where people just talk and shout at each other for hours about football.
Oh, yeah.
So he was
I've
the
seen those.
Benfica representative in
Oh,
these
fuck.
in one of these shows. Yeah. And then the other reason is he was a reasonably he was a member of the Social Democratic Party, and he became kind of high profile when he was candidate for mayor in a city in the Lisbon metropolitan area, which has a large Roma population, and so his whole campaign was against Roma.
Wow.
And at the time, the Prime Minister, Passos Coelho, was a big supporter of him. He went to support him in the campaign trail, and his whole campaign was just, these people are living on subsidies, whatever. It's still his main point. It's still racism against
racism. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. But specifically against Roma, that's his main, that's his main focus.
There is some data. Sorry to cut you off, but you also we were talking about it before, that Chega did, over 10%. So more than their national average in majority minority neighborhoods. I'm not sure exactly. I guess you can't analyze that more. I think the assumption is that there's white voters, maybe downwardly mobile white voters in these neighborhoods are being radicalized to the right. And that represents the Chega vote, but maybe it's too early to tell in Portugal, but it's something that I just keep in mind, especially with France and even older in Brazil, which is almost like a cross racial white nationalism, if that makes sense. Zamor openly plays up the fact that he's like Jewish, and so try calling me anti-Semitic kind of thing. And there's a way that one group can be a scapegoat for more other non-white Portuguese voters, but of course without changing anything about the structure of Portugal or any other European country, and the racial structure of them. I don't know if that's too early to tell, or if that was any element of the dynamic.
Yeah, it's really difficult to know. I mean, I haven't seen any very good statistics about trying to figure out who, because
it's very small. For example, anyway, either way, it's very small. Like people point to Trump winning a small. He did better among Latino men and black men in 2020 than 2016, but by just a little bit. Like it's not like this massive phenomenon we have to take into account. But
it's difficult to tell. I mean, Chega was in third place almost every district, right? So it's not there's not this huge concentration in specific geographical areas. So it's all over the country. People used to think it's just in the interior and whatever, but it's not. It's also in the cities. And then there's also but then if you look closer in like smaller divisions, not just the districts, then there's this effect that you were saying. So there are some places where they have higher votes. And some of them, for example, are places with big Roma communities, where they have managed to capitalize on something that's always been there in Portuguese society, which is the racism against Roma it's pretty much the most socially acceptable form of racism in Portugal. It's something that many people who would not even say they're racist or whatever, they would still say that they don't like the gypsies because of whatever reasons. So this is something that was there, and then the Chega capitalize on this. So in some places where there's a big Roma community, they managed to get a lot of votes just because of talking about it. But then there's also other places where Chega has high votes, which are very high income areas. So it's where the right wing voters live. So it's not like. Right. So I've read many times that Chega was getting, for example, votes from disgruntled Communist Party voters, whatever. But actually, all of the serious analysis that I've seen don't show any evidence of this. It's a complete myth, and it was fabricated by the right because it's a useful narrative for them. So it's pretty clear that the votes that they're getting used to be either for the Social Democratic Party or for the other like Christian right party that was just decimated in this election. So this is where they're getting their votes. I've
also seen it shown that I don't know if they track it exactly, but the Christian Democrat, the CSU,
Yeah,
I think they
CDS.
CDS, sorry. Almost like the CSU.
Yeah.
When they were,
I mean, they're of the same political tradition as
right.
They're the Christian Democrats, right?
But a particularly right wing form like the CSU, and that when they were in the minority partner in the austerity government, that percentage is roughly equivalent to the percentage for Chega and the Liberal Initiative.
Yeah.
So, is this the rise of a new right, or is it just shuffling around?
I think it's mostly shuffling. I mean, it's like these people, they used to be in the Social Democratic Party and in CDS. I mean, for example, CDS, now in this campaign, they had this whole thing about how they respected the social doctrine of the church, and so they couldn't be racist and whatever. But at the same time, they were the legal Democratic Party in which so after the revolution in 1974, all of the former fascists who wanted to stay in politics in a respectable vehicle, they went to CDS.
Of course.
So in many of the, I mean, and some of the current high-profile figures and new MPs from Chega are from CDS and from PSD. So it's not like this out of nowhere. No, they were always there. They were in CDS and PSD. And in Iniciativa Liberal, it's the same thing. I mean, what they are proposing, the ultra-liberal right, what they are proposing is what the Social Democratic Party was trying to do during the austerity years.
Yeah. I want to talk about them now, actually, because perhaps similarly.
Let me just say one more thing about Chega,
go ahead.
Which is that one of the people that got elected as their MPs is this guy who was a member, a leading member actually of a far right armed organization after the revolution, who was bombing Communist Party headquarters. They murdered multiple people in bomb attacks at Communist Party headquarters. And this guy is now an MP for Chega.
Wow.
And they're proposing him for vice president of the parliament. So this is, it's an ongoing
What's his name?
thing. So it's the only guy from Chega that I know apart from André Ventura.
Wow.
What's his name?
Diogo Pacheco Amorim. I can write the name somewhere.
Please do.
Is there... Where do I write? Is there?
Good question. There's a chat over to the right hand side, I think.
But I mean, you see these kind of developments, like they're similar to the AfD in Germany. We have so many members from the AfD that come from the CDU because the CDU wasn't far right enough. Or you even have people from the SPD, from the Social Democratic Party, so not the Christian, which would be the equivalent of the Socialist Party, basically. It's a...
The reason I wanted to bring up the Liberal Initiative, we can go back and forth on it a little bit, is because if they're proposing the same policies as before, and if Chega perhaps more openly, like with the case of this the head of this right wing armed group that you mentioned, if they're stating perhaps more openly policies that existed before, there's something that at least there's a new branding or something to it, or a new narrative. And the Liberal Initiative has this sleek, it fits very well with the FDP here. And the reason I think the FDP, for example, we've talked about it on the show before, why they got the most, by 1%, I think, the most new voters in the last election, is because they're pitching a certain kind of, nothing in society matters. You're out for yourself. You should want to be an influencer and just be on your grind, and you're getting your money, and you have followers because you deserve it, because you worked hard, and forget about everyone else. I'm not sure if it's the same youth dynamic, but it certainly is tied to a lot of. It has a very clear correlation, I think, with income and education. You have these certain high income, high earners in Portugal voting now, not only supporting these policies that they would have in the Social Democratic Party in the past, but now building a political identity around this is our party and this is what we're like, this is what we stand for.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is what they've done. They've taken a section of the. So I mean, both with Chega and in Iniciativa Liberal, I mean, these tendencies were kind of under control or on a leash, inside the Social Democratic Party and the CDS, so where they had to make a compromise because they were big parties were trying to win elections, right? And with Chega in Iniciativa Liberal, they're not trying to win elections, and so they are allowed to be much more to say what actually they want, right? with the liberals. I mean, they're really very extremely ideological party. I mean, they had a 600-page political program where they try to portray themselves as this very professional. It's the complete like technocratic thing, right? They just want to run the country properly. Yeah. They have 600 pages of program.
Yeah,
and they wear this. The leader is this guy who also went to a German school in Lisbon.
I know, it's a thing in Portugal.
And what's interesting to me about them are those European connections, because in a lot of ways they're implicit. Like he looks like he could be an FDP member. The João, I forget his last name, the head of their party.
FDP.
He looks like he'd fit in here. Like, there's that element of it, but then there's also like an explicit cooperation between these ultra-liberal parties across Europe, which is why I mentioned to you this Estonian, what's his name again? The Estonian guy that I sent to you.
Yeah, Estonian.
Yeah, the FDP finance minister that's from the FDP.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So he supported the liberals in Portugal.
Oh, okay.
Sent some message saying that he supported them for the election.
Of course.
And there is something like an international movement. They're quite small, but there's, whether it's branding or narrative, there's this idea. I'm not going to try to say his name. How do you say it?
It's like Tavi Rivas.
Tavi Rivas cooperated with. He is the former prime minister of Estonia, who is part of the austerity parties there, who was speaking at this conference and helped, I don't know if helped author or was collaborating on this Portugal 2040 plan for the that the Liberal Initiative was doing. So it's quite explicit.
2040, well, they have some time.
I don't know if that's ambitious or not
your way
ambitious.
from an opposition party to a like People's Party, I
but
guess.
It's quite explicit, and it's not like we're doing something completely new. We're copying what has happened quite explicitly in other European countries that aren't that much smaller than ours.
And that's one thing you notice in the campaign is that they were making some proposals which were really, really extreme and which didn't get talked about in that way, right? I mean, this guy, the leader of the Liberals, he said in one of the debates that he thinks there shouldn't be a limit to the number of working hours. Like,
that
should be no limit.
It really, I just
and the problem is, and this didn't get. I mean, for example, when the left proposes nationalizing something, it's like they're crazy, whatever. But when the liberals say something like this, it didn't even provoke much of a reaction. And I think the problem, the difference is that this is actually the ruling ideology, right? I mean, and it's just that it's kind of unmasked, but it sounds reasonable. I mean, it sounds like it's part of the status quo. It sounds like it's something that could happen and that it's serious. It doesn't sound like the left promising everything to everyone and the dream world and whatever. When the liberals talk, it sounds like, this is a serious, realistic proposal. Let's just have a flat 15% tax and privatize health and
tough love
social security and education.
Like Germany.
I have a few, because speaking to the international aspect, they often point to other countries. And I have here, these are links from their program, at least the 2019 program. They want healthcare reform like Germany, which means introducing private competition with public. Yeah. And
what they failed to mention is that in Germany, the state spends more on health in terms of percentage of GDP than in Portugal.
I know.
It's
this one's particularly insane to me, which is introduce student fees to make Portugal more like the United Kingdom.
Why would you want to be
which
like
is
UK?
That's how can anyone
like London doesn't even have student services anymore or something like that. Like, why would you want that? That's like.
They said that
I know why, but
students should pay the full price of their education. So they said there should be student loans.
That's some cute elitism over there.
Yeah,
and I mean those are just egregious examples, and on top of liberalizing the labor market. abolishing the national minimum wage, which seems to me like and talking about these like local minimum wages.
It's just so funny. It's like people forgot what was going on 2011 to 2015. Everyone is like, let's do austerity, but make it a thing that we do constantly. Like let's introduce it to
exactly.
society.
I mean, I think, and that's the weird thing is that like people like Pastor Coelho, who was the prime minister here during the austerity crisis years. He's in the Social Democratic Party. He probably agrees with the liberals on everything. He wants the same thing, but he's smart enough to know that you can only do these things and talk about them when there's a crisis, right?
Exactly.
You wait for the crisis, and then when there's a crisis, you say, "Oh, now we have to privatize everything and
we have
cut
to
on
save
and
money.
destroy labor regulations, whatever."
Yeah.
The liberals,
no public spending.
the liberals just decided that we don't need a crisis. We can just, openly say that this is what we want.
Yeah.
And apparently, crisis normality.
Well, it's very interesting because it's a dynamic that's going on. It's a new kind of politics. It's like I did send you that article from the Anton Yeager about the hyperpolitics.
It's like they want the chemotherapy without the cancer.
But what's interesting about it is that they do, but they're only 5%, or they have 8 or 9 seats.
Yeah,
and you can say that that's good that they're small, but it's almost part of the strategy or part of the new form of politics, which is extremely explicit. Like the reason to hide the like your cancer chemotherapy analogy is because you'll scare away the voters, and they're not scared of quote unquote scaring away voters because they are a small niche party. Yeah. But all you need is somehow this constellation of niche parties will add up to a very reactionary government because they can all, it's almost like a different, instead of the typical politicized people and get them involved in policies, they're hyper politicized, at least in terms of identity or narrative. They feel like they're a liberal. They feel they follow the results and, we have our Linda in the finance ministry in Germany, they can point to other places. Yep. And it exists in some ways on the left too, which is why I think it's interesting to understand, because you should resist this tendency to want to, follow your team, because it's like it's like in lieu of a pacification of the population, it's like putting you on a treadmill to always be like, freaking out about politics or like hyped up about what's going to happen, but in a way that is always setting you up to fail, because you can't. Capitalism's moving in one direction, and you can tell whatever story you want about it. Depending on what party you're in, you can be more like Chega, you can be more like the ultra liberals, but ultimately you are just kind of cheering on the collapse in your own specific way.
Yeah, but it's interesting how the right and the left have done the opposite things here in Portugal. The left has tried to change their discourse into a more kind of moderate, a bit more moderate, and try to be more reasonable and negotiate with the Socialist Party. And the right, it's the opposite. They're disintegrating into small, more radical parties. And the thing is that, for some reason, and this is what I was trying to talk about a little bit before, when the liberals go on a debate and talk about their outlandish proposals, they sound much more reasonable than when the left bloc or the Communist Party would go there and just talk about nationalizing energy sector, right? I mean, because they are sort of the status quo, right? I mean, neoliberalism
working within the framework of capitalism. They're using, they work,
so
doing what everyone is doing or wants to do, but they're more outspoken about it.
Yeah, so journalists don't accuse them in the same way of being crazy and irresponsible when they propose a flat 15% tax, which would cut like state budget by this gigantic amount. They don't accuse them of being responsible in the same way that they accuse the Communist Party of being responsible if they propose to nationalize energy. It's very difficult to figure out how can the left go and unapologetically have a radical program and defend it in an election campaign without being immediately marginalized. And the right is able to do that. That's the thing, that the left hasn't really been able to do this.
I don't want to cut us off, but we do have to wrap up. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'm all ears. So how is the left supposed to do that? I tend to think that the media. So the same two words keep coming up, which is the election campaign and the media, and these are terrains that are often set up to make the left fail. And that doesn't mean you avoid them but I think it means you have to be very tactical about how you engage with them. That's easier said than done, right? That's very simple, but it's like, okay, what exactly do you do? But something about this whole game, this hype, this, oh, there's a new phenomenon going on, and oh, we're starting something new. That tends to it's like a fake kind of politics, or it's like the vapor waves of politics, that you're a part of a movement but you're not really. You're just vaguely identifying with a person or cheering on something you read in the news, which is not a true political connection. It's not building new social connections. It's not any of those things. But I don't know what the alternative is that the left can engage in.
Yeah, I mean, the alternative is the labor movement and social movements, and this is this is how the Communist Party and the left bloc got such a good vote in 2015 in the first place. Mm-hmm. It's because there was a mass movement, right? And now they're both. I mean, the Communist Party always has this. They're very consistent, right? Whenever after an election, whether the result was good or bad, their narrative is always, now the election is over, we are still by your side every day. Yeah. So immediately after the election, they were posting propaganda about being in workplaces. And,
I'm always for that. I'm always say like, okay, we need the movements and we need the grassroots activism and we need all of that. We need to go into the workplace, etc., etc. And I always get criticized, especially by German leftists, for that.
Why?
Really?
Yeah.
Sorry, but
they say like, but you see, we have to turn away from a movement left or something because it doesn't like work in politics or something like that.
I think there needs.
They want to turn away from movement and into electoral politics exclusively, or
that's the thing. It's almost like I think the problem in Germany now is that movementism is associated with a certain kind of. Is elite the wrong word? But a certain kind of young activist milieu. But it doesn't have to be. That's not like it's a false dichotomy to set up electoral, staid old electoralism and young enthusiastic activism.
But I thought the fight was movementism versus labor unions, right? I mean, it's at least the way that I see usually these debates. For example, in Die Linke or whatever, it's the ones who want more, old. The East German labor movement, whatever, versus like social movements, anti-racism and feminism.
I think you can
that
is probably more agreeable than the shit I get critiqued for all the fucking time.
But even then, it's not quite like that's not exactly the dichotomy, because you can do like oftentimes the labor, the quote unquote labor approach that's against the movementism it's almost like an accepted, or the implied answer is and it's this kind of working with it's reformist, it's with these sort of electoral paths, it's with these different strategic partners, but that's not necessarily that doesn't necessarily have to be the case.
Movements are spontaneous. Movements are not like, they don't have a like solid core or something like that, where you can have people from all over the place and stuff like that. So but if you, I don't know, like if you look, for example, at countries in South America, the ones that just elected left-wing politicians as their presidents and leaders, very movement-based, or not movement-based, also very, it depends, like some very labor-based, a lot of people also very movement-based, like climate activism, indigenous rights, etc., etc. So I'm always like, I mean, it's not comparable to like situations in Germany, but at the same time, I'm always like, why does everyone hate that so much?
I think it's perfectly compatible and to do to labor movement and other social movements. I don't think there's, I think there was for a long time this idea that only the labor movement is the real thing and everything. I think no one really can defend that anymore. I think they're two different things, and I think they can. I mean, for example, here in the protests during the austerity years, you had a complete convergence of social movements and trade unions and the left parties. But this is always the easiest times to converge is when you have something that you're against. But then everyone is together. because there's a very clear thing that you're against. You don't need to agree on almost anything other than austerity is bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, that is something that the right creates, basically. They have a constant enemy, and that could be like, I don't know, for Chega, it would be Roma people or something like that. You know, you create like a constant enemy, you create all the communists. And that is not necessarily,
What's the only, so I understand the argument that people are brought together by a common crisis or common enemy in terms of the rise of the left leading up to 2015. But there's something, or there's some kind of like gap in the explanation or in the narrative here where it's, okay, this is how the left built its power, and then it switched to electoral politics. And it's like, well, why would you do that if that's how you lose your power? You know, there's something that's not adding up, and it must be because, it's a spring to the next level that of even greater social penetration and acceptance. So then you have to go back and say, okay, so we have to rebuild, but will that rebuilding hit a ceiling, or do you commit to it and go further than you don't have to make the electoral jump you'd made last time?
I mean, I guess that's actually what we were talking about like the whole time is like, okay, what happens to left-wing parties, movements, etc. as soon as they get into like a kind of like electoral politics situation? They have to form coalitions. They have to give up on like radical standpoints, etc., etc. So the question is, how? What?
I mean, talking again about Portugal. I mean, I think the problem is it was not the left bloc and the Communist Party that started the mobilization.
Yeah,
so this was not in their hands. That's the thing, that they can't just flip their fingers, snap their fingers. And so what happened, I mean, the anti-austerity protests in Portugal were kind of in continuity and the result of the general, 2011 indignados, Arab Spring, this kind of stuff, This is how it started, right? And then it grew and grew, and then at a certain point, the left bloc and the Communist Party were kind of in control of the biggest demonstrations. And when the election happened in 2015, this was already kind of dying down, this big movement. So it's not like they won the election and then they said, okay, movement is over. Like the movement was already kind of over when they won the election. So I mean, they didn't stop. I mean, and so of course also they invested more of their time into the parliament. And of course, when you are supporting the government, you can't be as hard on them. You can't call for general strikes when you are supporting the government. There's just certain things that you can do. But at the same time, the Communist Party never always kept their trade union work, and the left bloc also was doing work in social movements, just with much less intensity than they had been doing before.
Of course, yeah.
And hopefully now they're going to go back to it. So.
Yeah. Well, it's the same with Die Linke, I mean, that's a whole like trenches fight, Grabenkampf of Die Linke is so like, okay, should we go into government? Should we do, electoral politics? Because we have to give up on certain stuff, or should we be the like never-ending opposition? Like forever in an oppositional position, because there we can fight for because we don't support this at all.
It's just maybe it's just me, but there's something about the debates get so frustrating because of the implied baggage. So when you say opposition, you have a certain picture in your head of what it means to be in opposition. But I mean, as long as there's capitalism, I want to be in opposition to capitalism. So that's it seems like if that's opposition, that's great, But it's like there's people. There's a way of talking about politics where it's designed to make you jump to conclusions. Where you're like, okay, I got it. I'm not on that team. I'm on this team. Or it's kind of filling in the blanks for you and forcing you to sift. And you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I'm going to be on this side. Which I don't know. I don't even know how to get out of that. But if there are any lessons from Portugal, please let us know.
No, I don't think there's. Yeah, no.
Are you optimistic? Would you say about the future?
Portugal? I'm hoping that there will. I mean, there's two things that were making me optimistic. One of them is the leader of the Communist Party in the election night, in his speech, talked about climate change. It was the last in a very long list of things that he was talking about that that he said is important now to keep because we all keep fighting with them. And they don't. I mean, the Communist Party has some things about climate change in their program, and their leader would talk. For example, I went to see him speak about ecology and climate change in like a specific event, which was about that. But in their main like high profile, if they're on TV in the election night, this is not something that they usually talk about. It's not one of their main priorities. And he talked about it. He said the word climate change at the end of a long list of problems. So I mean, this is encouraging because it's very difficult to get the Communist Party doing something that they're not doing already. They're very big, slow machine, big, slow moving machine. And then also this interview with this guy from the left bloc who was talking about now focusing on movement work, and he talked also a lot about the climate movement and about of how the left bloc is now going to can have an important role to play there, and they're going to put. So I really hope that the Communist Party and the left bloc are going to put more effort and more resources into social movements in general and climate movement in particular. Yeah, I think that's maybe could be a good perspective for what's going to happen in social movements in the next few years.
I have nothing to add to that. I don't know if you do.
Thank
you, Manuel. Is there anything you want to promote? We can put if people want to reach you or want to learn more about the climate movement in Portugal. We can put links in the description. But if there's anything you want to say, feel free.
No, I don't have. I don't have any things to promote. You can put my. I don't know. Put my Twitter if people want to ask something.
I will. You're too humble. Please message Manuel on Twitter. You can ask him any questions you want.
Even if you don't have a question.
If you have the latest, if you have any anti-Volt memes, that's always a good way to reach out to people across the.
Yes.
No, I mean they were so irrelevant in this election.
I still saw their poster.
Kieran and I talked about it. It's a little bit of a bait and switch because the same thing happened in Germany, where you're worried about Volt because you think they crack the code of this certain. Oh, this is what we're like, this pro EU youth identity and like kind of sneaking in the ultra liberal politics. Whereas what's actually successful is the explicitly ultra liberal politics. Like, why even care about the nerd stuff? Yeah. It's the same thing with the FDP here. So. There's some lesson in there, but I'm not sure what it is yet.
It didn't work.
They didn't have the right wing edge to them like the Julis, for example. That want like a German empire but run under capitalism.
Also, maybe their space was occupied by this other. There's another left pro EU party who got one MP elected.
Right. What are they? Leave?
Leave it. So and they had elected someone in the past election. So then when you elect someone, then you get to go in the big boy debates. You get invited to the big debates. So then they had the big. So they were the ones defending the EU. So that we didn't need. So Volt
Great place.
So Volt got their. They lost their space.
Yeah. All right. We have to go. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Manuel.
Yeah, it's been a nice chat.
Yeah. If something else big happens in Portugal, we'll call you.
All right.
All right.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.